Welcome to LawWiser and another interesting conversation where we are deciphering the Chinese app ban and the impact on its businesses. For this, we have with us Arpita Mukherjee, Head India Legal, Fab India Overseas Private Limited, and Suneeth Katarki, partner of IndusLaw. Welcome, guys.
Pleasure, Arpita, to be chatting with you on this.
Yeah, likewise. Great pleasure.
Specifically discussing among them the most hotly spoken about, which is the ban on various Chinese apps.
Yes.
Predominantly, TikTok, WeChat, etc., which are very popular in India. So, while we all understand the sentiment around, why it was done, what's the background, what's the political situation, etc., and, all the patriotism that goes with it, I think we should also be a little mindful of, behaving like a country that's very responsible, doing things in a way that is perfectly okay under law, not seem arbitrary. And therefore, let's, I wanted to just, look at the order and see what we could have probably done better, what have we done reasonably well, and, what are the next steps, etc. So maybe, so can I just set the context of the, what happened under the order? First of all, I think the context of 69A, which is the provision under the IT Act, Information Technology Act, which was used to ban, because that's the only provision under which such a ban can be done. As I was saying, Section 69A has a checkered history. It came up under challenge in the famous Shreya Singhal case. And the reason why it came up for challenge was, is it something that is excessive, regressive of our freedom of speech and expression guaranteed under 19? And after a lot of debate, as you know, the Supreme Court finally said, this is okay. While they struck down 66A, they said 69A is okay. And the two reasons why they said it. One is that the language which said the basis on which the blocks can be done include integrity of the country, security of the state, defense. These are grounds which are specifically provided in the Constitution under Article 19 as grounds on which freedom of expression can be restricted. So that was one. The other, I think the second, which is more important, was they also felt that there was a very good procedural safeguard in terms of how 69A could be enforced. And the procedural safeguard is something that, we need to look at. And that's really, really quite strong. And we should examine in this case how well it has been followed.
I have my reservation on 69A per se, because as I read 69A, it is primarily about content. I mean, if you see, there is a specific use of the word information, and it is, in my mind, it is about content. So to, en masse block everything starting from battery saver to mapping devices to just about everything under the sun, under 69A itself is a question mark to my mind. I have not been able to resolve this, and probably, it will emerge gradually. In terms of procedure, of course, they are supposed to follow established procedure, and there are rules for that, which also somewhere, I feel that so they've possibly used a content regulation route in my mind to contain something which is more about privacy and protection of data. So somewhere I feel that 66 and, part of even 43 and 69 have all somewhere got mixed up, according to me, or it has been used systematically to 69A especially to keep it out of the ambit of any RTI or any questioning in future. So as we speak today, I don't see too much transparency as to how this has been arrived at and what is it that has triggered this, this ban, other than what is immediately known and what is in the public domain in terms of our, sudden strain on the relationship with China per se. So, so if you ask me about procedures, I find that it's a lot of opaqueness around that as it is.
I agree with you, Arpita. I mean, the only possible defense that Indian government has is to say that, look, when I say information, I am talking about information that is of the customers. The data of the customers who use these apps is itself compromised because this goes to possibly the Chinese government, and
It
Chinese
is, yeah.
government and the Chinese law may itself not be strong enough to prevent abuse. Therefore, it is possible that one argument for India to take is, look, Chinese government can always access data of the Chinese companies. And if Chinese company data consists of data of 130 crore Indians, that data then is available to the Chinese government. And therefore, I'm going to target Chinese companies specifically. However, I would have preferred that called out in the order itself, because the order says we've got a lot of complaints,
Yes.
it talks about complaints which the ministry has received. It talks about complaints that the cyber crime coordination center has received. It talks about the CERT, the computer emergency response team, having received.
Yes.
There's so many complaints that is received. It must have happened over a period of time. Now, therefore, should an emergency response have been given, or should it have been used to then issue a notice, do a hearing? Because that's the regular procedure. Emergency
Absolutely.
is only an emergency use. The regular procedure would have been, for the designated officer to establish a committee, and the committee is supposed to consist of very senior officers, not less than the designated officer himself is supposed to be a joint secretary, minimum rank. So that is one of the reasons Supreme Court also had upheld this law, saying very, very senior officers are going to look at this, and therefore we believe it is in good hands.
Yeah.
And they should have used that to possibly do it. As I said, however, in India's defense, the one thing you could say is that, look, we are only targeted China because we don't believe the Chinese government, because it gets access directly to Chinese company data and therefore Indian companies' data, we are targeting China. But politically, it may be very difficult to do that, and they probably didn't want to say that in as many words, but that's somewhere implied.
In telecom, we have larger giants sitting there, who have more data than anybody else, perhaps, especially the network provision business and the business even partially to an extent of mobility. Just about every single individual's data, which is worth something, would be with them already. So I don't know how effective just banning these sundry apps is really, what should I say, will have a desired result. And also additionally, I have been reading that while the apps are banned, so as to say, but the companies aren't. So, and some general reading will tell you that there are mother companies which own some of these apps. They are actually, taking up space in India. They are forming companies in India. They are even planning to take their headquarters out of China to elsewhere to sort of subvert this, whatever the ban or the embargo. Or so, I don't know whether all of these have been really thought through, and it only reminds me of something that I very fondly remember Justice Endlaw once telling us, at a infringement hearing, that some of these guys who run their servers across the world and they just pick up the server and go somewhere else, they're like the hydra-headed monsters that you chop off one and it gets two more. So I'm kind of reminded of that. I know that I'm not sure whether this has been comprehensively thought through, or there is something more to it that is possibly not in the public domain as of now.
To add to what you're saying, you're right. One is that, the parent companies, etc., have not been sort of stopped. Also, the replacement for a lot of these apps seem to be yet other Chinese apps. So
absolutely.
Now, therefore, again, what is the purpose that you have achieved by doing this? And therefore, should you have looked at it a little more comprehensively, tried to see how best you should stop, who you should stop, and how do you control this going forward? Because ultimately you can't be, again, another 15 days identifying 10 other such apps,
Yes.
imposing again yet another emergency response. I mean, then it doesn't reflect well on you at all. Why did you again have to go through some kind of an emergency provision? You could have thought through this, applied your mind, given a hearing, come up with factual data on exactly
Yeah.
what aspects of the sovereignty, integrity is a worry, what is this data that these guys have, which you're concerned about, and then go ahead and, make your response under 69A. Two things. One, as we discussed, should the companies themselves have been banned? The argument that India as a government would probably try to give is, look, we are trying to be more scientific. We are only trying to control apps that we believe violate, the data integrity and our sovereignty. If the company itself may be doing other things which we don't believe violates this, and therefore we have not tried to make it so arbitrary that we just ban the company. So that's one argument I suppose the Indian government will take and say that we have not banned ByteDance. We believe that TikTok is something that takes data of people and in a way that is hurting our sovereignty, integrity, and security. But ByteDance itself may otherwise have certain other apps which may not violate 69A. Now, whether they do or not, that's a different question. But at least they're trying to say and to argue in favor of India that let's keep ByteDance alive. If they come up with some applications or if they have something else which are in consonance with the law as we require them to be, we need not necessarily ban them. So that's one of this thing. Two things about what is the effect of these bans, right? One is, yeah, as you rightly said, what's the vacuum created? Who is rushing to fill that vacuum in? Certainly, it's a tremendous opportunity for India. There are already, you may have already heard, there's already news about some of these companies that are getting funding because they want to quickly scale up and take the place of some of these apps. So that's happening,
But
which is good to know, but there's a long way to go for them.
Suneeth, I mean, I have a sort of an observation here. So when it comes to funding, uh, again, I don't know. And there sort of other surreptitious way of, again, similar people funding into your startups, and it's common. It's like it's known to everyone that most of the startups have sort of creepy acquisitions happening, and many times by Chinese, the rich of China. So I don't know whether it's as simple as that so they can always come
it's an interesting point also, Arpita, you brought up.
Yeah.
Because, of course, the one other thing is that press note 3, where
Yes.
the FDI by Chinese entities have been not banned, but requires approval of the government before they can make it. Of course, there's a lot of controversy of who is Chinese. Even Facebook has a lot of Chinese investors, hedge funds who invest in it. So it's controversial. It is difficult to enforce, and therefore, while clarity on that is also awaited, I don't know why the clarity hasn't come. So it's leading.
And also, Suneeth, sorry to interrupt you. To my mind, it's like it's a little bit like peeling of an onion. How far do you go to establish? Ultimately, the money is coming from where? Because there could be one wheel after another. Of course. So and, it's in today's world. It's all so sort of merged up that it's easier said than done. I mean, it's a little aspirational.
Absolutely. It could be a Mauritius entity, which is owned by a Cayman entity, which has some individual who's based in Hong Kong owning a part of it. Somebody else who's a Chinese national, but a US resident also owning some part. So it gets extremely difficult to sort of...
Just look at ByteDance, for example. ByteDance, if you see, it's actually Cayman. But then it has people who are related to the Chinese government. It has connects to the Red Army. It has connects to the government, although it's a Cayman entity. So if you just lift one whale, you'll find Cayman. Okay, safe. But then how far, like I said, how far do you go? And who does that? And at what point of time? And at what cost?
some of these apps had created what I would love to call as a democratization of our social media, right?
Yes.
People who were not in any way sort of celebrities could become celebrities as a common man simply by their ability to put up, videos that connected to people, and therefore they could become influencers, they could earn money, they could,
Yeah, and
influence opinion. So a lot of such things, and interesting things like I heard that, Tibetan refugees are struggling because WeChat is no longer available to them. They used to use that to communicate back with their, people back home
back
and
home.
family, and that they can't do that now. So yeah, very very some of these effects on Indians themselves are sad. As we
And
said, hopefully there are other Indian entities or maybe non-Chinese entities that will come into sort of fill that gap. Today or yesterday, Mr. Modi was talking about saying how US companies are most welcome in India and they should invest more, etc. So maybe the gap will get filled by somebody
yeah,
other than Chinese, and that's the hope.
when you ban these organizations, not everybody is a ByteDance. ByteDance is a large entity having interests in so many areas. I understand they have recently taken up space in Goregaon in a very large commercial space. So they want to operate. They're shifting base out of China to steer clear of their, so-called Chinese, whatever. But there are smaller players. There are other players. There are 59 of them. How many of those have organizations in India? What happens to those people? How many
Yeah.
are going to or have lost their jobs? And couple it with COVID, and couple it with the fact that there are hardly any opportunities. And also, this is probably the wrong time for somebody, let's say, like I hear that there's somebody like apps like Roposo and others, who are Indians. Now, do they have the funding? Has somebody thought of immediately injecting something into them so that they could pick up at least some of these people, the cream from these places who are probably getting furloughed or just thrown off the track? And is there a plan for all of them to come and set up something and make that make that entity take steam and create a sort of a value proposition that's at least, if not at par, somewhere near to a TikTok or a UC or whatever?
I think what the Indian government can possibly do now is one, of course, post the emergency measure, they have to also, have a proper hearing, and then the committee should come up with a reasoned order on what it's going to do, or why it justifies the ban, or why the ban shouldn't continue, right? Now, I think as part of that process, it's important that the Indian government comes through with something which looks much more reasoned in terms of exactly what were the issues, which are the entities that they're going to ban, which are the apps that they're going to ban, what exactly is the thinking behind it. Simultaneously, while they're doing that, they should also think of, as you Arpita rightly mentioned, how are they going to encourage, either local apps that can take this place, and it's important that local apps come up to take its place, or they're going to encourage Japanese, American, European money coming into this, either through their own applications or through their own capital to fund Indian entities which can grow. So they have to have additional incentives also. So it needs to be a sort of multi-pronged approach.
Absolutely.
Yeah, while
And
we have
that's why, I said somewhere that it has to be collaborative. You can make it multi-pronged when you involve people who are in the space and who know how the space sort of evolves gradually. And also, one thing that I would really want to ask you, since you are in litigating practice, have you heard whether anybody is really approaching the Supreme Court? I believe there's a 226 that is available to
yes.
any of these people, right?
Yes. What I heard right now is that most of them are not approaching the court. They are trying to solve the problem through the government, make a representation to the government, tell them why they don't fall foul of 69A, understand from the government what is it that the government feels they're not doing right, see if they can rectify it, remedy it. They will go down that path. And
Okay.
obviously, if they fail there, they will always have the option to approach the courts.
Thank you, Suneeth. Thank you, Arpita, for this interesting conversation.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you.
Thanks.